Hi. Life throws many puzzle pieces at us, and we have to figure out what to do with them, how to situate them so they don't cause so many problems for us. And one of the puzzle pieces, life puzzle pieces, that I think almost no one likes is failure. We avoid failure at all costs. We try to get away from it, we run from it, but we just can't get away. It's a fact of life. And maybe some of us even have experienced that puzzle piece here lately when our New Year's resolution failed after maybe just a few days, possibly. But there's lots of failures. There's in life, and we could name our own failures. We try to lose weight, we gain weight, and or our business fails, or we get fired, or we go into bankruptcy, or we didn't make the good grades in school that we wanted, or our marriage fails, we get divorced. There's so many, they go on and on. When we label something a failure, you can't feel good about it. I don't know anybody feels good about something as a failure. And it's even worse when we label ourselves a failure, because once we label ourselves that, there's no path forward. It's only a path to depression and hopelessness and giving up if we see ourselves as a failure. So what do we do? What do we do with that puzzle piece of failing sometimes that we can't get rid of? How do we situate that puzzle piece in our lives that doesn't cause us so much suffering and so much pain and so much anxiety? What do we do? Well, one thing is we're never going to feel good about failing. I don't know anybody who will feel good about that. But there are some things we can do to make it a little less painful, I think, when we run into it. Um, naming something a failure, an action or what we do, naming that failure is a judgment. It's a judgment. And we use some kind of measuring stick or gauge to decide whether it's a failure or a success. It's good to know what we use as a gauge. Usually what we do, we use the outcome of our efforts as the gauge, the end product. So we do something and we expect a result. And if it doesn't turn out that way, we label that a failure. Society uses that gauge quite a bit. If you don't measure up, if you don't do what it is expected, uh, you're a failure. But the end product of our actions a lot of times is not dependent just on our actions. It's dependent on lots of other things that are outside our control. For example, I may have a bad golf game, and it's not. I can label that a failure, but the wind was blowing 30 miles an hour. The wind wasn't in my control, and it it made my golf score worse. Well, I can look at that and say, well, that's a failure, but the wind wasn't in my control. Or I'm working on a project with coworkers, and it turns out to be what I would call a failure because it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. Well, it didn't depend just on myself. It depended on my coworkers and working together and all other kinds of things. So am I a failure because of that? Or, it depends on my health at the moment. You know, uh, that's, whether I do what I am able to or when I'm healthy or not. So a lot of things, are beyond our control. And it's not a very good gauge, not a realistic gauge to say it's a failure if it doesn't depend just on me when there's lots of other things involved. So what do we use as a better gauge to say something's a success or a failure? Well, one of the things I think we can always use you know, if we do the best we can with what we've got, that's a gauge of saying if something's a failure or a success. That's in our control, doing the best we can in a given situation at a given moment. That's ours. It's not anybody else's. It's not dependent on anything else. It's just ours. But, my best, you know, that's mine. But that doesn't mean perfection. My best does not equal perfection. Uh, I can't run a 4 minute mile. Does that mean I'm a failure? But I can run a mile in some amount of time, and it can be my best. And so that can be a success rather than a failure. Another example, I can't possibly know every outcome of an action, all the things that could happen, so that I could choose the perfect option. I can't know all the results of every possible option. Does that mean if it turns out badly, I'm a failure? Well, my best could be to choose the one that makes the most sense to me, as far as I can see it. If I do my best to choose the one that makes sense to me, that's a success. That can be a success rather than a failure. Doing the best with what we've got. With what we've got doesn't mean that we're all powerful, that we have all the abilities in the world. That's ridiculous. Like I said, if I'm sick, I can't give as much attention to my family as I would have if I am healthy. Now, if we say, well, that's a failure, well, I can't do much about being sick. There's a pretty unrealistic judgment there, pretty unfair judgment. Um, my best today, may be different than my best tomorrow. It changes. We get better at doing things, and my best tomorrow might be better than I do today. But both days I'm doing my best, so I can be a success in each day. Don't have to be a failure one day and a success in next. It's kind of pretty irrational to believe that we can do more than our best. You know, um, you know, it's that doesn't work. That's not logical. It's not rational. Even God doesn't expect us to do more than our best. It's doesn't make any sense. If God wanted perfection, God would have made us perfect. But God didn't. So I think all God asks of us is that we do our best. And we can do that whenever we want to. We can do that whenever, if we're sick, if we're not sick, if we're, whatever. In my experience in working with people, and I've learned a lot, people have taught me a lot as I've worked with them. In my experience, most people do the best with what they've got. I mean, it's kind of just kind of what we do, generally speaking. I've never heard someone say, I could do my best, but I'm not going to, even though I don't have a good reason. I don't hear people saying that. I hear people saying, well, I tried to do this and it didn't work, but I I tried the best thing I could. I chose the best uh, course of action that I thought was the best one, but even though it didn't turn out, I hear people saying that, but they're still doing their best. If we can use more realistic gauge for proclaiming success or failure for ourselves, then we'll most likely be judging others a little bit less critically too. We'll probably use the same gauge with them also, and give them the benefit of the doubt that, well, they're doing their best with what they've got. And if we do that a little bit more with ourselves and with others, I think it'd be a probably much better world. So I hope that some of this helps you to make those failures in your life a little bit less awful and a little bit less painful.